Germans and their forests have a special relationship. Forests are considered a part of the German soul, their origin and cultural identity. Currently, a third of Germany's total land area is covered by forests. It was a great effort of Germans to regreen their land after the Middle Ages, when large areas of forests were cleared for agriculture and other uses. How did the Germans achieve this great work? A story about the Goettingen forest, a piece of the German forests, may tell us the secret. Goettingen, a city of science, is located on the Leine River in Lower Saxony, in the heart of Germany. It was officially founded in 1230 by Heinrich dem Lowen, dynasty of Welf. Just 2 kilometers east of the city center lies the Goettingen forest. Nowadays, the Goettingen forest is an extraordinary green landscape covering an area of approximately 1,800 hectares. However, like many forests in the world, the Goettingen forest landscape has been modified by human activities, especially the part of the forest which is close to the city center, the so-called Hainburg. In 1252, Duke Albrecht granted the citizens the right to freely use the Goettingen forest. Since then, the forest resources have served the needs of the people for nearly 500 years. Limestone was quarried to supply the city construction of the main city hall, gates, walls, towers, and roads. Traces of limestone mining can still be seen today in the Goettingen forest. Timber was extracted for house construction and furniture. Firewood was collected for cooking and heating. Then, in 1302, shepherding rights were obtained for the Hainburg. Over time, the land use changed, with forest areas progressively being converted to pastures of sheep, pigs and goats. From 1351 to 1457, hundreds of wool weavers, cloth makers, and traders were encouraged to settle in Goettingen after the city joined the Hanseatic League. The main product supplied by Goettingen to this trade network was wool clothing, which was largely exported to the Netherlands and Lubeck. In those 500 years of history, developing a wealthy city was the primary concern of Goettingen. Forests, as a local resource, had to serve that goal. However, everything has its price. The landscape around the city had deteriorated, due to the exploitation of forest resources, limestone mining and pasture. It was described in 1868 by George Merkel, former city major of Goettingen, in his memoir. A bleak view of the barren limestone slopes building up to the east of the city, like a desert. This overexploitation of forest resources had not only affected the landscape but also caused soil erosion. In the book Der Goettinger Hainburg by August Tecklenburg, the author wrote, "The heavy rain and melted snow did not penetrate the open soil. These surface runoffs formed bigger flood channels and went downward to Goettingen." By the end of the 16th century, Goettingen's wool industry was under declining. The wool products from Goettingen could no longer compete with cheaper English textiles. Therefore, sheep farming lost its importance. Bare land from intensive tree felling and limestone mining had become wastelands, and attempts to use these lands as vineyards or for planting mulberries for silk cloth were unsuccessful. Starting in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the idea of reforestation was arose. Over the past 100 years, the barren hills of Hainburg have been transformed into what we see today. The rich flora resulting from close-to-nature management makes the Goettingen forest look like a primeval one. Aware that the successful forest restoration in the Hainburg of Goettingen could serve as an example in the regreening of many deforested regions around the world, the students from the Master Program, Tropical and International Forestry of the University of Goettingen, supported by the Forest City Office, conducted a forest inventory and investigated how the forest here has been restored. Valuable lessons emerged. Lesson 1. Species site matching for successful tree cover on denuded land. People in Goettingen have been aware of planting trees to prevent soil erosion since the late 1770s. But which trees can survive in the local conditions here was not an easy question to answer. Despite the generally warm and temperate climate, soil in the Hainburg Goettingen was unfavorable for tree planting as it was stony dry soil with poor drainage. Early attempts in the late 1770s to plant fruit trees and beech on this mountain has no success. Later attempts with downy birch also gained little success. In the early 1800s, fruit trees such as apples, plums and cherries were tried again, but only some cherry trees survived, which can still be seen today. Around this time, approximately 6 to 14 hectares of wasteland and inactive quarries were planted with poplar, linden, and willow by a master builder Rohns. It was successful since he isolated the land from cattle, kept water in banks and holes, and fertilized the trees. People also observed that European ash, maples, Norway spruce, and poplars grew excellently around the Well-Rains-Brunnen like an oasis on a bleak mountain. It can be seen that the knowledge of which tree species could grow in this local condition was obtained from time to time by trials and failure, as well as by observing nature. Once the Goettingen people gained an understanding of some tree species' characteristics and their adaptation to the local conditions, the reforestation began to show positive results. Large-scale tree planting in the Hainburg was carried out from 1871 to 1882, led by George Merkel, former city mayor. He reported this work in his memoirs. The most interesting but also difficult task, which I had the rare luck to engage and to fully complete in Goettingen, was the forestation of the 110-hectare dreary limestone mountain above the city. It is particularly interesting from a forestry point of view because it was not achieved by the cultivation of pine, as this was the principle of forest science until then, but through the cultivation of more undemanding soft broadleaf species. These are gray alder, acacia, birch, wild cherry. This new method of afforestation has been approved by many German foresters, recognized as a successful attempt. Lesson 2. Enrichment planting to establish a close-to-nature forest. After covering the bare land in Hainburg from 1871, more tree species were planted to increase the diversity of the forest, such as beech, ash, maple, chestnut, oak, and pine. From 1920, Mr. Fruchtenicht, a former leader and chief of the city forest office, started the idea of managing the planted forest as close to nature. The main measures include planting with only local tree species, no clear-cutting but only single harvesting for promoting natural regeneration, and minimizing forestry interventions. Lesson 3. Unifying land ownership and land use right for long-term afforestation projects. After tree planting in the late 1770s, the citizens realized that the livestock in the targeted area was a reason for the failure of afforestation, in addition to the wrong species selection. Therefore, the city of Goettingen attempted to unify the land ownership for the targeted area. They bought the land on Hainburg in 1864, just some years before the large-scale afforestation started. In 1875, by local regulations, the city also tried to exclude livestock from the planted area and to limit the use of pasture. From the 1910s, 40 hectares of land, near the Care, were sold to the Goettingen city for reforestation purposes. Thus, the arable land on the Hainburg has also been reforested. In many regions, once the forests have been cleared, these forestry lands are converted easily to agricultural land. But the Goettingen city has done the reverse by converting the land back to its original use. Lesson 4. Human and nature. A win-win relationship. Before the 20th century, local life was very dependent on the forest. Resources such as firewood, timber, and stone were once indispensable for the basic needs of the people. The relationship between man and nature seemed to be a one-way relationship: nature gives and man takes. This is unsustainable. However, the consequences after overexploitation have shown that humans cannot just simply take resources without paying back. The huge effort of Goettingen to restore their forest has demonstrated the transformation of a one-way relationship to a win-win relationship between man and nature. And of course, both benefit from this significant mindset shift. Nowadays, the forest is still publicly owned and managed by the city of Goettingen. Since 1920, the basic principle in forest management has been close to nature. Biodiversity conservation and high-quality timber are the main foci. Beech is the main tree species with a share of nearly 60%. Ash and maple are also well represented. Wood stock in 2021 is estimated at 420 cubic meters per hectare, with an annual growth of 7.7 cubic meters per hectare. The maximum annual harvest is set at approximately half of the annual growth, so about 4.6 cubic meters per hectare, in order to store carbon. The Goettingen forest is one of the most popular excursion destinations in the region for recreational purposes such as nature walks or sports, mountain biking, horse riding, or meditative relaxation. Walking along the forest of today, we see a beautiful landscape covered by trees. However, the scars of the past are still there to remind us how important forests are and how much effort it took to bring them back for the people.